Welcome to the Practically Pastoring podcast. So excited. We have a very special episode for you today. I'm joined by one of my best friends in the world. His name's Frank Gill, but we also have another special guest, good friend of mine as well. His name is Jim Howard. So before we jump in, got a really great topic on hand. Jim, would you mind introducing yourself and maybe sharing a little bit about your background, church safety, and kind of why we called you on today?
My name is Jim Howard, and I am the executive director of Trinity Security Allies. We are a nonprofit ministry that goes around the country helping churches set up what we call safety teams. We don't like security, we call it safety teams. And there's a reason why. Anyway, how we got into it. I mean, this is a God's unseen plan. That's just all there is to it. When I was 16 years old, my parents were going through a divorce, and my father showed up at church on a Sunday night and walked outside and shot and killed a deacon that was working with my family during this time of crisis. And probably would have killed my mother if she had not left early, but it just changed my life completely. I was a churchgoer. I accepted Christ at an early age. I kind of walked away from Christianity, was very upset, and through other circumstances, not knowing where I was going in life, kind of floating along. Believe it or not, I had a major in music, and kind of got robbed one day, carjacked, and got involved in the investigation and the arrest of this guy, and really got into law enforcement. So the next thing, 38 years later, I kind of left law enforcement. The reason why I did leave law enforcement is that our church, I turned my life back over to Christ after I was messing up intensely, about to lose Jessica and Wendy, and I turned my life back over to Christ, got back into the church, and was looking for places to serve. And kind of one of the places that I never thought that I would ever serve was being a part of the church. At that time, we called it security team. We were raising a lot of money for a piece of property that we had purchased in Pasco County that we were going to build a new church. And so they asked me to watch the money. So during that time frame, we had an incident that happened of where a guy had supervised visitation with his children, and he was not supposed to have his kids unless he was in a state facility. And he would come to church, and this is before we got really good about children's ministry and safety in the children's ministry. And he would pick up his kids and walk out the door, and nobody would stop him. Well, of course, the wife just kind of she loses her mind on this and tells us that there's paperwork on it and all these things like this. And they came to me and said, what should we do with it? And I said, if she produces the court order that says he cannot have these kids, we have to protect these kids and stop him from getting them, because if he does something bad, hurts one of them or something like that, then we're kind of caught right in the middle of it. So while waiting for the paperwork, her family came to town. They were from Ohio. Her family came to town, and they were there on a Sunday and intercepted this guy and wanted to take the kids from him. And he looked at his ex-father-in-law and said, I will kick your, right now, and doubled his fist up and was, angry and all these things like this. So we immediately stepped in and kind of separated everybody and escorted him off the campus. 2 weeks later, a Pasco County detective showed up at our church that I was going to and said, hey, do you know this guy? And we were like, yeah. Well, 2 weeks ago, he killed his landlord and then set the house on fire. So all of a sudden, the church kind of said, okay, let's rethink this. So because of that, they came to me and said, I think we need to really, really look at having church security. And they said, how do you feel about putting together a team? Well, the first thing I did was I wanted to make sure that it was biblical. And so that's where really, I started getting into the word of looking for how we could say that we could do this in a church. Well, of course, David had his own 33, his mighty 33 that surrounded him and protected him. And then we look at Nehemiah 4, 13 through 16, where it talks about Nehemiah posting families by the lowest points of the wall. And it said families. It didn't say policemen. It didn't say mercenaries. It didn't say any, the king's army or anything like that. It said families. And then, of course, Isaiah 62:6 says, I've posted a watchman on your walls, Jerusalem. They will never be silent day or night. Ezekiel 33, 1 through 6 is what we tell pastors they need to read because Ezekiel tells them to put a watchman on the wall, or if not, danger comes into your camp and kills people. That responsibility is going to be on your head. That blood will be on you. So we just, Ephesians, of course, we know, put on the full armor of God. We always love that one. But the big one that really caught a lot of people off guard was Matthew 28, 18 through 20. And that is the Great Commission. Because here's the thing. Everybody that sets up a safety team thinks that they're bouncers or security guards. But Christ said, go to everybody. He didn't say just, pastors, people at the door, or anything like that, little asterisk at the end that said, except for safety teams. So as safety team members of a church, we need to be the ambassadors of the church. So we should look for people, and this is our training, this is what we train in. We teach people how to look for people that seem uncomfortable when they come in the door. Because we have three types of people that come into our door. We have those that come to worship, and within 2 minutes, you can tell. They may be new, they're looking for where they go, children's ministry, all these different things like that. You have those that are hurting and one step away from doing something they may regret for the rest of their life. So aren't we supposed to be administering to these people? Isn't that our job as a church, to be helping these people? So we get them into the right person, or we ourselves help out. And then also we have the wolves in sheep clothing. And I can teach people that within 2 minutes of a conversation, you can start to see what category these people fit in. So I look at church safety as a ministry, that we should have men, women, it doesn't matter which, both inside our church that are ambassadors that are not afraid to go up and start talking to people and having a conversation with somebody to find out why they're there. People come to church for those three reasons. They don't come just because they feel good. And let me rephrase that. Members come because they want to hear the pastor. But when you have a new person that walks on your campus, they're there for one of those three reasons. And so as the ambassadors of the church, then we get to know who we need to be watching and who we shouldn't, who we want to help or who we want to get them involved in it. So it's kind of a different mindset. I've run into a lot of people that sometimes I don't get to play in the big guys game because I don't talk about the gun. I do talk about armed or unarmed inside a church. I just did a presentation with 29 people last night on recent church shootings that, we do an after action critique and we look at ways that we might have prevented this, or we could have done something to maybe slow it down, different, all these different things like that. So we do teach that. But like I said, our primary concern should be, as a safety team, is the expansion of the kingdom of God. And then our second part of that is to protect the flock. So that's who we are at Trinity Security Allies.
I will say that your service here at Lakeview Church has been really, really great. And just having the conversations and even some of the things that we are hearing about, like safety issues in other churches and how you prep the team has been really, really good, especially as I am planning to plant a church. I'm now thinking, how are we going to do this? And we'll have that conversation offline.
Sure.
But
sure.
I would love, so we have a Facebook group at Practical Pastoring. It has over 1,200 pastors from across the country. And one thing that we ask for often is for people to post anonymous questions, because you don't know who else is in the group, of real issues that they would like answers for. And this one came across us, and when we saw this, we were like, we got to call Jim. And so that's why you're on this call. So let me read this question for you. So we had a situation recently where a new visitor to our church who was there for the first time was being really fidgety in the foyer. And our church security team noticed that they had their hands in their coat pocket and they were acting all nervous. So one of our security guards pulled him aside and patted him down to make sure he wasn't carrying a gun. The guy wasn't. Apparently, he was just super nervous and socially awkward. But of course, he didn't come back to our church after the first visit. I had been very thankful for our church security team, and it has been a very positive thing, but I wonder if the situation could have been handled differently. I am glad that they acted, but at the same time, I have a feeling this is the reason the visitor hasn't been back to our church. I wonder how you guys in your churches do security. Do you have an official team who oversees them? How would you counsel your security team to handle this situation like this? So that's the questions that he's asking. I want to ask you, how would you evaluate the best way to handle that specific situation? How did they handle it? And how would you suggest to handle it? And what principles should guide a safety team in situations like this?
Wow. I can tell you right off the bat that we would never handle a situation like that at all. And whoever emailed or whoever posted that should go back to that guy and say, please don't ever do that again. Now, joking around, I mean, we've said this before, we would consider that the Holy Ghost pat down. I mean, usually we hug people and then start to do the pat down, as we're hugging them. No, all kidding aside, terrible, terrible, terrible way of handling that. I in my training, I try to get people to understand that second person that comes into your church that is at a crossroad of where they don't know where to turn. And if we treat them look, what if this guy just lost his wife or just got caught playing around on his wife or, just lost a family member or something like that, has never turned to religion before, but shows up because he just happens to be driving down the street and God kind of says, the Holy Spirit just kind of says, come over here to this church. And what happens? He walks in and we have biblical reference. We can use this of where we put him in the back so that, he's not honored. This is the way we would handle it. This is the way we would handle it. First thing I would do, I would walk up and introduce myself as Jim Howard with Lakeview Church, not Jim Howard, head of the safety team at Lakeview Church, but I would introduce myself as Jim Howard from Lakeview Church and say to them, are you okay? You seem like something is bothering you. Now, one of the things, like I said, I'm going to reach out with my right hand. Why am I going to reach out with my right hand? Because if he's right-handed, he's got to take that hand out of the coat and shake my hand. If he does not, we do training that we would say that this was a push. He pushed away from me because he refused to shake my hand. That's going to bring an alert. So we would sit down with him. And we would talk to him. I mean, we would address everything that's going on. And if you felt that at any moment there was something wrong, you're sitting right next to him. You can make a move if he tries to do something. One of the other things that we talk about, one of the other things that we really, really, really stress is that if you feel this guy's fidgety, he got his hands in his pockets and all these things like this, the first thing you should do is contact local law enforcement and have them on the way. Because let's just say he does pull a weapon. If police aren't on the way by then, you're already behind, you're left of bank. I mean, you're right of bank. You're right in the middle of bank. And so you've got a terrible problem. But I would never, ever treat anybody different than I would treat a guy that comes in with a suit on. It's just, we're all children of God. What is the reason you're at the church? Tell me the reason. Is the reason that you've come here to worship? You come here searching for answers? You're mad at your mother who might be sitting in there, and you may be thinking of nefarious things to do, but maybe we can interrupt that process and get it moving in the right direction. But to stand somebody up and pat them down, you just now told them they're not good enough to be in your church. That's exactly what you've done. And so do you think this person is going to come back to your church? I know why he didn't come back to the church. I can tell you that right away. We had a guy that showed up at Lakeview that had a huge backpack on, riding a bike in the rain. When he came on property, I said, you can't take the backpack in the church. Now, the reason why I say that is not because I'm trying to be difficult, but he didn't have a kid in tow. So I know that's not the diaper bag, because we see so many backpacks now, NRA backpacks, that have diapers in them and stuff like that, because men are too macho. They don't want to carry, my favorite pony or something like that. So they carry these huge backpacks with everything in it. Are we going to start searching them also? What about big purses? I mean, it gets kind of convoluted there. But he came to the church. I introduced myself to him. He was riding by, he said, and he felt the Spirit lead him to come into the church. I said, fantastic. We're a church of redemption. We want everybody here. We would love to have you. But I can't let you take that backpack in because it's a tripping hazard. If we were to have an emergency and you dropped it, we have elderly people in here that would trip and fall over it. And so we have a problem. I said, I'm more than happy to put it in a room and lock it up for you. And he immediately grabbed it, held on to it. Now that tells me he's homeless. Immediately grabbed it and held on to it and says, you can't touch it. And I was like, okay, fine. I don't have a problem with that. Now, he did come around to me and said, you can search it if you want to. And I was like, if you want to open it up and show me what's inside, that's fantastic. But I'm not going to say yes. Because what does that do again? I don't trust him. I'm going to be near him. We kept near him the whole time he was there. But then I started setting ground rules. And you could tell that when I set the ground rules, we were not the church for him. And the first ground rule I set was, you are more than welcome to come here and worship with us, but you cannot ask for money. I said, if I catch you asking for money, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. What else can I do for you? And he said, well, I need a job. Then I said, I need your name and a way I can contact you, because I will put it in front of the church. And if we can find you a job, I'll contact you and tell you. But it won't happen like, right now, unless it's a miracle. You have to treat everybody like you would treat your own parents. You just do. Because if you don't, then we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. We don't see Christ. Listen, I love Christ so much because he was a rebel, and I love that part of him. And he went against injustice. But when he met a sinner, he didn't one time look at them and say, you're a sinner. He always looked at them and said, how many times did he say, do you want to walk? Do you want to see? Do you want me to cure you? Why aren't we doing the same thing? Why aren't we there to help? So, like I said, we have to be careful when people walk in. And this is why you have a trained safety team. This is what I keep saying to people, because I will come in and help you get to the point to where you can look and see a person that looks uncomfortable and walk over and start the conversation. Hi, my name is Jim Howard with Lakeview Church. And you go from there.
It's really good, Jim. As you know, this is kind of a podcast by pastors for pastors. So a lot of us are pastors, not necessarily security professionals, safety professionals. So this is, foreign territory for some of us. So how should we even think about safety in the church? Is it primarily prevention? Is it hospitality with awareness? Is there a more formal safety model that you would encourage?
Well, I'm going to address it a couple of different ways here. First off, everybody that comes into your church has an expectation of safety. Okay? When they walk on your property, it's just like if they walk to your house. If you were up north, you need to clean your driveways or your sidewalks to make sure that they don't slip and fall. If they come to your house, you need to make sure that they're aware that, your feet are wet and you got, slab down, you might slip and fall. You have to, because what happens if a person gets hurt on your property, you can get sued. So that there's a legal aspect of it. You need to limit the liabilities that happen at your church. So that would be the first thing that I would tell them, because really that's when, you get churches' attention when you start talking about being sued, because they don't want that. That's a financial thing. They know that would ruin the church. They just don't want that. I know of churches that have had incidents happen at their churches that they have not recovered because of the lawsuits that followed afterwards. They just have not been able to pull it back together. So the first thing that we want to talk about is limiting your liability. Now, the second thing that we want to do is we want to get professionals in here. So go to a website like mine, trinitysecurityallies.com, and start looking at how we do things. Like I said, I just got a call from a church in Cincinnati. I've never been to Cincinnati in my life. Been to Toledo, but never Cincinnati. And they went to our webpage and read about us and felt that we were a fit with them. And I was very honored that they would do it. And I want this to sound the right way. It's an all-black church. To be called me, a white guy in the South, because they like what my page looks like, is a great honor to me, because I want it to be, it doesn't matter to me. Paul said it himself. It does not matter whether you're Jew or Gentile, male or female. It does not matter. We want to protect the flock, expand the kingdom. So they need to look for a professional. And I have a lot of friends that can help them with liability issues. I mean, write up beautiful plans as far as FEMA and OSHA and all those things like that go to cover to make sure that you're safe in that. Talk about the laws of the state, how you should be doing these things. But I'm going to give you an example. What you talked about, Frank, at the beginning, this letter that was written. If they would have fought with that guy and he had nothing on them and he would have gotten injured, they would have been sued. They would have been sued. It would have been a terrible suit. So we have to learn how to work together on this. I see too many churches where the safety team is on one side of the field and the church ministry is on the other side of the field, and they're not meeting in the middle and treating this the way that they should be treating it. So call a professional. Let us talk about it. I love talking to new pastors. I think that pastors should be at our training. Tim, hint, hint. I think that pastors should be at our training because I want them to feel comfortable about what we're talking about. We had a conference and Jamie Johnson, who was in charge of Department of Homeland Security, the faith-based initiative during that time frame, came to our church and wanted to meet with pastors. And as he's talking to the pastors, he says, I believed in an armed church. Okay, I'm okay with that. But then he says, and I believe that you shoot to kill. You put 2 in the chest and 1 in the head. Pastors lost their minds. The pastor at the church I was going to looked at me and said, that's not what you teach, is it? And I said, no, it's not. And we don't want to scare pastors because the first thing that they start thinking about is the gun in the church and people run around with guns and the different things like that. We have to explain we're limiting our liabilities. So if we limit our liabilities, we have to limit what type of force we're using in there. And we have to limit what type of training we're doing in there. So we're very big on reducing your liabilities by putting the safety team in that works on making sure everybody in the church is safe. And that includes a medical team, which we have one, which is fantastic, which is one of the best, because we have more medical emergencies than we do safety issues. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to lower the liabilities. And that's what you should be thinking about. Stop thinking about, oh my gosh, I'm going to have 10 guys in here with big guns and they're going to be shooting up the congregation. No, that's not what it's about. Not what it's about at all.
You talk about not promoting guns, and that is one of the characteristics about what you guys do that is different than from other places. But as you know, some churches have people who are concealed carrying. Some are even on staff. Sometimes they're members. What would you say is the wisest way for churches to think about guns in amongst their congregation, amongst their staff? Should churches have policies around it? I've seen churches that have signs on their doors that says this is a no gun place, but like I don't know how much that can be policed, if you will. And then you kind of talked about this, and I'm interested to hear how you think about this, because I know your heart that the safety team can be a place where especially young men or men in general can have a place to belong and to serving. But like how, in a broader sense, how do you create a culture of hospitality and welcome with the reality that some churches literally have, like I can picture a church right now where there's a safety guy with a bulletproof vest and a gun off to the side, watching the pastor and making sure no one jumps him or whatever. Like how do you balance all that when it comes to guns specifically?
You're talking about churches I know of. So, I mean, there are churches that do this. There are churches that do this. The first thing that I say to everybody, if we're doing our job as a church safety team, then we should spot the danger before it happens. Now I'm gonna get to your answer on guns. Okay, there's a whole different. I mean, there's like so many different outlets here that you kind of have to. So bear with me. Churches have to get out of the gun business. Okay, period. Take the guy that you put in charge of your safety, sit down and see. One of the things I know that a lot of people talk about is where does the safety team fit? Really, to tell you the truth, the safety team fits under either the pastor or the second in command. And I'll tell you the reason behind that. We lose a lot of, it's like the telephone game, telegraph game, whatever, where I say something and it goes to somebody else and then it gets to the pastor or the second in command and it's completely convoluted from what I said. We have to have a direct contact with leadership. That's just it altogether. Because if we have an issue or leadership has an issue, they come to the safety lead and they talk to him about the issue. Now, bulletproof vest, I've worked with guys that wanted to wear bulletproof vests in the church. And I look at them and go, no, this is a terrible concept. Do not do it. It's optics. We have to look at this. I have had churches that arm everybody and try to figure out how they can get more guns inside the church. That right there tells me that your mindset is not right on what you should be doing. We should have our heart aligned with Christ every time we walk on church property. Because if we have our heart on our ego, on problems at home, on issues in the church, then our judgment is going to be completely off. Using a gun is the last resort. Law enforcement, listen, 38 years in law enforcement, I can tell you that a lot of times in my mind, somebody has ticked me off so much that I'd like to shoot them in the foot. But I know that that's not justifiable. So I have to go that extra mile to make sure that this does not happen. So when we get into church safety, it has to be the furthest thing from everybody's mind. Now, do you put up signs that say gun-free zone? I wouldn't. I just wouldn't personally. A church called me back when DeSantis had set up the anybody can carry. They call it constitutional, but it's permitless carry, that anybody can carry that doesn't have a felony. Well, they freaked out. They were like, what are we going to do this weekend? We're going to see 1,000 members with guns on them. And so I said, what do you do now? And he goes, well, I don't understand what you mean now. Florida has 2.5 million concealed weapon permits in the state. I think that's a low number right now. So if you have a congregation of 1,000, you probably have 150 to 200 people inside your church that are carrying concealed. What are you doing now? And he goes, well, nothing. And I go, so what's the difference? You haven't had a policy ever before in your life. This is what I tell people when somebody comes up and talks to me about the gun. First off, I'm training my team that it's the last resort. I'm going to train them on verbal de-escalation. I'm going to train them looking at a person like a Christ would look at a person. I want to tell them that we should be witnessing to these people first. And if our heart is right, he's going to protect the church. And I'm going to give you a good example of this. The other thing is that we can't qualify people. We can't do things like that. The church themselves should write a letter that says, we do not require you to carry. If you carry, it is on you. And you have to know the rules, liability, the laws, all those things like that before, if you're going to carry. And you should, and this is what I recommend, have some sort of insurance to protect you in case of a use of force and not relying on the church. But we get hung up because I've been in churches where, one guy says, I've got a gun over here. One guy says, I've got a gun over here. And you got crossfires. And it's like you're going to kill people. If I walk up to somebody that has a weapon, I know that they have a weapon, and they're not on the safety team, I'm going to ask them very politely, please, if there is an incident in the church, do not pull your weapon. And here's the reason why. I know the safety team. I do not know you. They don't know you. If you pull your weapon, you become a target. And we're listening to law enforcement is here, put your guns away, all these different things that we are working on to be a team. So, you have to get serious about it. Like I said, my training last night was all about shootings, active shootings. And one of the things that just happened here recently was a church in Michigan where a deacon was running late, saw a guy doing donuts in his church parking lot, pulled up and stopped. He pulled up next to him and said, are you okay? Do you need some help? Where I would not have said that, I'm telling you right now, I probably would have looked at him and go, hey, moron, this is a church parking lot. But he had that he was Christ-centered at that moment in time and said, are you okay? And do you need help? The guy got out of the truck with a rifle, an AR-15, put on a carrier with extra ammunition, headset, and shot at the church. Now, why did he shoot at the church first and not at the deacon? If he's going to kill people, why didn't he shoot the deacon first? Because God saw, and his name was Richard Pryor, which I just love, Deacon Richard Pryor. God saw that Deacon Richard Pryor's heart was right, and God protected him. Now, what did Richard Pryor do after he sees this guy shoot at the church? He takes his F-150 and runs over the guy. Almost problem solved. Almost problem solved. But he even says it was divine intervention because never in his mind would he have thought of running over somebody. Never in his mind. But all of a sudden, something came to him and said, put this truck in drive and take that person. So we have to teach this. This is not just one and done. This is a constant work that has to go into church safety.
For sure. This is good, Jim. Love the Christ-centered approach. I think it's one of the reasons you and I have partnered so well together for many years.
Sure.
The other, of course, being your daughter grew up in my youth group, which was awesome too.
And you're the reason I'm doing this. You are truly the reason I'm doing this. Because when I was at the police department, when I was at Bel Air, a little known fact, one of the town councilmen had come to me, and because we were having internal issues, and a town councilman came to me and said, keep your nose clean. When this chief leaves, you're our next chief of police. Now I'm wrestling with this. I mean, that's what we always want to be as chief of police. And I had got the chief that was there then called me a liar, which is something you can't have on, that just doesn't go in law enforcement. And I wrote a letter of resignation and I was praying over it. And while praying over it, I got a text from you that said, I need your help and I need you now. And that was it. That to me was God's calling that said, turn in your paperwork. And I did, and haven't looked back since. So you're the cause of this. You're the cause of this.
Wow, that's terrifying. Jim, as you know, this show is called Practically Pastoring. So let's get really practical here. What is one thing a church could do today to make their church safer? And then as a follow-up, let's say a church doesn't have the budget for a formal team. What's a realistic first step?
The first step is to go to our webpage and pull down the PDFs that we have out there for free that says, planning to create a safety team, what you should do for a safety team. There's 4 different documents, what to look for on Sunday, and also weapons in the church. We did one on that. If you go and take a look at those 2 documents, it can put you in the mindset of where you should be going as far as protecting the flock. The second thing I would say, especially in small churches, is get everybody into a culture of awareness so that everybody, anytime somebody walks in the door, anytime anybody walks in the door that starts to make you feel uncomfortable, this person, they're going to look uncomfortable, so it's going to make you feel uncomfortable. There should be some sort of contact right at that moment. And anytime you feel like this has the possibility of going south, you contact local law enforcement. Because I'm going to tell you, we would rather be called and it be nothing at all to calm your fears than to get there after the incident has happened. Because then the aftermath is something you don't even want to deal with. So, and plus, like I said, reach out to us because we do a lot of online training that is free. And, I'll talk to anybody about it. It's my passion. It's what this is my mission. God gave me this mission and said, go do it, And Wendy keeps looking at me going, when are you going to retire? And I go, I don't know. He hasn't given me permission yet. He told me to look for it in the Bible. I can't find it. So I'm going to be here for a while. But, you don't have to have money. And we can do things to help you where it's cost effective to where it doesn't cost you anything at all. I just did training at a church over at Seffner, and we had given them a price. And the way that we set it up, because they charge people to come in, there's a couple of reasons behind that. Won't go into that now. But we charge people to come in. So when all was said and done, the people that came in paid for their training. So they didn't put any money out at all except for coffee and snacks. That's all they did. So we can make it affordable. So they just have to call. We have to talk about it, and then we go from there.
You said earlier that the safety team should sit under the first or second seat of leadership at the church. That was a question I was going to ask you, is like, where does this sit under the leadership structure? And so that's really helpful, because for clear communication, the highest up possible is good. So my question then is, how do you recommend churches train their volunteers? Not just for emergency situations, but like you said, how do you train them to go up to the people who are making people uncomfortable and to engage in those conversations, to have the Holy Spirit pat down, or whatever the case may be? Like, how do you train these people, especially if, like, I would imagine that some churches, they don't have anybody in law enforcement. They don't have anyone with any kind of like safety or security kind of experience. How do you do those trainings?
Well, we have multiple different trainings that we do. One of them is church safety, where we come into a church that's talking about putting together a team, and we tell them the reasons why. We just share, like we talked about earlier, liability issues, protection of the flock, protection of our children. When I go into the church the first time, that's the first place I go to is the children's ministry to see how it's structured, because that's your number one responsibility. Sorry, Tim, you as a leader of the church is not the number one responsibility. Our number one responsibility is the children, because without those, they're our future. They're our precious gifts that God has given us. So we want to make sure that they are taken care of. There's plenty of information out there on how to, but look, y'all have conferences where you have pastors come in and talk about how to pastor a church. There are books upon books upon books written about church. Sticky Church, I think, was one that somebody gave me to read. And I was like, what the heck is, like, I'm not a pastor, so it didn't really mean a lot to me. But they're saying you should read this. And I'm like, well, why? So we look for professionals. Now, first training that we do when a church is interested in doing a church safety team, we do church safety. We talk about the reasons why, what you're going to look at, what people to put in charge, all the different things like that. Then the second thing we do is we start teaching them what to look for when a person comes into your church. It's called threat profiling. It is based on the Marine Corps combat tracking and profiling, but it works perfectly for identifying people that are hurting. I can't tell you how many times I've done this training, and following Monday, I get a call from a church that says, one of the things that you brought up, I noticed, and the next thing you know, I've got a threat inside the church, but I was with them. So just because of what you trained, I was there. Now, here's a good one that we just had happen. We did the children's ministry came to us and said, we want something specifically for the children's ministry. So I went out and did a personal safety training that was designed for them, what to look for the groomers, all these different people that you have to be careful with, and how to spot them when they walk in your door. And they looked at me and said, well, I want you to train my kids on this because they need to know what is going on. And so we just made it a personal safety, which we offer to the whole church. We offer to outside anybody. We've done it at real estate agents. We've done it at homeschool conferences where it is personal safety. It's for you. It's for things that you might not have thought about before, that all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, gosh, I was just in this situation, and now I see where I handled it wrong because this person kind of became a stalker, So, we also have laser shot, which is a shoot, don't shoot, which I'm going to put it up at the church. It's portable. I can bring it in. We're going to do the training there. And it just puts people in situations where they have to react very quick. And I can't tell you how many times we've had safety team leads quit after going through this training because they say, I'm not ready for this. And here's the best thing about it. Laser shot, when we bought it, did not have church security in it. 2 years after we had bought it, they were at the SHOT Show. Y'all might not know what that is, but that's like the Detroit car show for gun enthusiasts. Everything is there. Helicopters, buy missiles. I mean, it's all there. Anything you want, anything you desire. Laser shot is there. And they had people come up and say, hey, do you have church safety stuff in this? And they said, no. And the guy there was the salesman who sold us the product and said, but I know of a guy that would help us set up training. So they came here, sent a camera crew over here, and we did 26 church scenarios from things that had happened in churches across the country. And we put it in the children's ministry. We put it in the worship center. We put it in, we have a little meeting place there in the front of the church, but churches that have large gatherings or the gathering, we put it in those places, the coffee shops. And so we did all these trainings based on things that we had seen in the church violence history. And so now we offer that. And it's funny because I found out, I was in Kentucky, and this guy, I was doing some training, and he said something about laser shot. And I said, yeah, I'm in those videos. And he goes, which one? And I started telling him, and he goes, I know exactly which one you're talking about. I said, yeah, I'm the pastor on the stage. And he goes, oh my God, so it has gone out. It is being used by churches across the country. So we offer everything from A to Z, even active shooter training. I do active shooter training. I've been certified with active shooter training. I'm a certified firearms instructor with the state. I still teach at the college. So I'm very aware of what is going on as far as firearms and, laws and how it affects the church. So we offer all sorts of stuff. Just contact us for a friendly conversation. I always tell pastors that contact me, I'm not going to sell them anything, because it's God's timing when they want me to come. Because if they go back to their group and say, hey, we got this guy that said he would come, this is what the cost is, and they go, nope, not interested in it. Okay, it's God's timing, And then 6 months, 7 months down the road, they call me back on the phone and said, I think we're ready. And I go, okay, let's go. Price didn't change. Let's do it. So just a conversation. I talked to this church in Cincinnati. I talked to the guy for over an hour, and I sent him pricing and all the stuff like that, what we train. And the next thing you know, he calls me and says, we want to do a Zoom call with you, and we're going to put all the pastors up here. I was like, okay, it's like an interview. We talked for an hour and a half, and we talked for an hour and a half, mostly about Christ, and second, about safety. So it was a great phone call, a fantastic phone call.
Jim, this has been super helpful. Personally, I just want to say thanks. I don't even know how many times I've had to reach out for different issues over the years. I've had, at least a dozen or so, possibly more pastors reach out with church safety issues, and I've been able to send them your contact info. This has been super helpful for us. I mean, you're helping us think through things that, honestly, we're not thinking about all the time, and sometimes we need to be thinking about. So before we let you go, one last time, where can people go to find more info and training and resources from you guys?
Go to our webpage, trinitysecurityallies.com. They can contact me at jim@trinitysecurityallies.com. Before I go, I just want to say one last thing. There is a reason why I do this. And it's 1 Peter 5, 2-4. Because it says, be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care, watching over them, not because you must, but because you are willing, as God wants you to be, not pursuing dishonest gain, but eager to serve, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that will never fade away. That's why I do this.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. Thanks for your time. Thanks for the help that you provide for churches and pastors all over the country.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. You guys are great.
Awesome.
Love both of you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Frank.